The lights inside the studio felt hotter than usual. Maybe it was because Jesse Waters was ready for another show, another battle he thought he would win. The cameras waited. The audience at home was ready. This was his world, and he loved it. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Calm, still, focused. She adjusted the sleeve of her dark blazer and smiled politely at the crew. She had done her homework. She knew exactly who Jesse Waters was and what kind of tricks he liked to play. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3. Jesse leaned forward, that famous grin on his face. "Good evening, folks," he began smoothly. "Tonight we have Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett with us to talk about a radical new voting bill. Let's see why Democrats want to make it easier for people to cheat." The trap was set before she even spoke. Jasmine took a quiet breath. "That's not an accurate... Congresswoman," Jesse cut her off. "You can't deny this bill removes voter ID rules in several states." He didn't even let her finish one sentence. Behind the cameras, his producers nodded. Perfect timing. This was the move that always worked. Cut the guest, twist the words, smile for the camera. But Jasmine didn't fall for it. "If you'd let me finish," she said softly. "I was about to explain. How does removing basic security make elections safer?" Jesse interrupted again, louder now. He wasn't asking. He was performing. Most guests lost control at this point. They would shout back, stumble, or try to talk faster. That was when Jesse looked to the camera and grinned, making them appear weak. But Jasmine Crockett was different. She had spent hours watching his old interviews. She had studied his rhythm, his tone, his favorite lines. She even knew which words triggered his interruptions. She was ready for this exact fight. "The bill protects integrity," she began. "Federal control over local elections?" Jesse snapped again. She smiled slightly. "Jesse, if you keep interrupting me, your viewers won't hear the facts." For a second, he froze. That wasn't how this usually went. He tried to laugh. "I'm just asking the tough questions." "Then let me answer them," she said firmly. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were sharp. The cameras caught that moment. She wasn't nervous. She was in control. She tried again. "These federal standards will prevent the kind of voter suppression we've seen." "Suppression?" Jesse laughed. "Requiring ID isn't suppression. It's common sense." That was interruption number 5. Behind the glass, his producers were thrilled. The show was going perfectly, at least from their point of view. But they didn't notice what was happening on Jasmine's face. The polite guest was gone. What remained was a lawyer watching her opponent dig his own hole. She let him talk. She let him interrupt again and again. Each time he grew louder, more arrogant. Each time she stayed silent, patient. People watching at home started to notice. Comments began flooding social media. "He won't let her speak. Why invite her if you're just going to talk over her?" By the 8th interruption, even Jesse's fans were shifting in their seats. His confidence now looked more like cruelty. Jasmine waited for the 9th time. She counted every single one, and then she turned to the camera. "You know what, Jesse?" she said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "I want to thank you." The entire studio went still. "Thank me?" Jesse asked, confused. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "You've just shown America exactly what I mean when I talk about suppression." He tried to jump in again, but she raised her hand. The movement was slow, simple, powerful, like a judge calling for silence. And for the first time in his career, Jesse Waters stopped talking. "For the last 3 minutes," she said, "you've interrupted me 9 times. 9 times you've stopped me from finishing a single point. You control the cameras, the lights, and the microphone, and yet you still won't let me speak." Her tone was calm, almost gentle. But every word landed like a hammer. "This is what happens to voters across America," she continued, eyes locked on the lens. "People are cut off before they can take part. They're told their voice doesn't matter. You say you want to talk about integrity, but you can't even let me finish one thought." The room was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the studio lights. Even the control room stopped moving. "Jesse," she said softly, "this is what suppression looks like. It's not always about ballots or IDs. Sometimes it's about who gets to speak and who gets silenced. Jesse's grin disappeared. The confidence drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You invited me here to talk about voting rights," she said. "And then you did everything you could to stop me from talking. That's not discussion. That's control." The producer's voice crackled in Jesse's earpiece, whispering, "Cut to break. Now." But Jesse couldn't move. Jasmine leaned back slightly, her expression calm again. "You say you believe in freedom of speech," she said quietly. "So let me speak." It was over. For the first time, the mighty Fox News host looked small. The silence was deafening. Jesse forced a weak smile. "Well," he muttered, "we're out of time." Her reply came fast and clear. "No, Jesse, we're right on time." The screen faded to black. And across the country, millions of people sat up in their chairs. They had just witnessed something rare, a moment of truth on live television. People began replaying the clip, over and over. Viewers started counting each interruption. 1, 2, 3, all 9. Comments poured in from every corner of the country. People said it felt like she had spoken for them, for every person who had ever been talked over, ignored, or told to stay quiet, and Jasmine Crockett had done it with nothing more than calm truth and quiet strength. The night had begun like every other Fox News segment, but by the time the cameras went dark, Jesse Waters' perfect script had shattered. What happened after that break didn't just shake the studio. It set off a storm that would change Jesse Waters' career and turn Jasmine Crockett into a voice no one could silence again. When the cameras cut, the air inside the Fox News control room felt like glass about to crack. No one spoke for a few seconds. Producers stared at one another. Unsure what to do, Jesse pulled off his earpiece, his hand trembling just a little. He forced a laugh. "Good show, huh?" he said to nobody in particular. But no one laughed back. Outside, the nightlights of New York glowed against the glass walls. Phones were already buzzing. Clips were being uploaded, cut and shared before the commercial break even ended. Within minutes, the internet caught fire. The moment Jasmine raised her hand, the moment Jesse went silent, was already everywhere. In living rooms across America, people leaned forward. Some smiled, some cheered, others simply whispered, "Finally." At first, Fox News tried to move on. They returned from commercial with Jesse smiling again, pretending nothing unusual had happened. He asked the next guest a few harmless questions, joked with the camera, then ended the show on schedule. But when the lights went off and the credits rolled, the mood backstage was heavy. Jesse looked down at his phone. Thousands of notifications. Hundreds of messages. His name was trending, but not for the reason he wanted. Clips of Jasmine's calm words spread like wildfire. Across social media, viewers kept writing the same line over and over. "This is what suppression looks like. No hashtags." Just those simple words, repeated again and again. By midnight, major news outlets were replaying the footage. CNN ran the clip 3 times in an hour. MSNBC called it the moment Fox News lost control of its own script. Even local stations in Texas, Florida, and Ohio ran the story during their late-night segments. At 2 a.m., Jesse's phone rang. It was one of his producers. "Don't check Twitter," she warned him. He already had. His mentions were a flood of criticism. Jokes and memes. Old fans defended him. But most didn't. They weren't laughing this time. Inside the Fox News building, emergency meetings began before sunrise. Executives wanted to know what had happened. How did a 3-minute interview turn into a public relations nightmare? They reviewed the footage frame by frame. Jesse interrupting. Jesse leaning forward. Jesse losing control. Then Jasmine raising her, and the silence that followed. One executive sighed. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just made him look small. By morning, Advertisers were calling. Several asked whether their commercials could be moved away from the segment. Others paused contracts altogether, waiting for the storm to calm. Jesse arrived at the office wearing dark sunglasses and a forced grin. He tried to act casual, but his staff could see the cracks. He avoided eye contact, pretending to scroll through his phone. At 10 a.m., Fox's communications team released a short statement. It said, "We welcome lively debate and strong voices on all sides." But viewers weren't buying it. The clip told a different story. By noon, the moment had become more than news. It had become a movement. Across Facebook and Instagram, people were sharing personal stories. Women posted about times they'd been interrupted at work. Teachers talked about meetings where their ideas were ignored. Every story began with the same words. Jasmine had spoken. This is what suppression looks like. Meanwhile, Jesse sat in his office scrolling. Through the storm, every few minutes he tried to type a response and deleted it. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to explain himself, but every sentence he tried sounded defensive. At lunchtime, one of his senior producers knocked on the door. "Boss, we should probably stay quiet for now," Jesse glared. "Quiet? That makes it look worse." "It's already worse," the producer said softly. By evening, the story had reached every corner of the country. Talk radio. Hosts argued about it. Columnists debated whether Fox News had finally gone too far. Late night, comedians joked that Jesse Waters had met the one guest who didn't need a microphone to win. Through it all, Jasmine stayed silent. She didn't tweet. She didn't gloat. She didn't even give interviews. She simply returned to Washington and went back to work, but silence can speak louder than words. Her calm absence made her look even stronger. Reporters called her staff again and again for comment. Her spokesperson finally replied with one simple line. "Congresswoman Crockett is focused on the work the people of Texas sent her to do." That one sentence poured gasoline on the fire. Now, she wasn't just the woman who had stood up to Jesse Waters. She was the leader who rose above him. By the second night, networks everywhere were playing the clip. Viewers who'd never heard of Jasmine Crockett now knew her name. Her social media following tripled overnight. Donations began pouring into her campaign. Website, small donors, teachers, nurses, retired veterans. People who said, "She spoke for me." Meanwhile, Jesse faced a different kind of reaction. His inbox filled with angry emails from longtime viewers. Many said they had watched him for years, but they didn't like what they saw in that interview. "You were rude. You talked too much. She made more sense than you." For a man who had built his reputation on confidence, it was brutal. He had always believed control was power. Now he was learning that sometimes power looks like patience. The following week, executives ordered changes. Producers were told to ease up on interruptions. The famous hand signals, those silent cues used to tell hosts when to cut in, were quietly banned. Jesse nodded in the meeting, pretending to agree, but deep down he was furious. That night, when he returned to his show, something felt off. He smiled, but the spark was gone. He asked questions, but he didn't push. He tried to sound calm, yet the audience could tell he was holding back. Ratings began to dip. The next morning's numbers showed a drop of 200,000. Viewers, Fox executives called it a fluke, but it wasn't. People were tuning out. Across the country, Jasmine Crockett's star was rising. She was invited to speak at community events, colleges, and legal conferences. Clips of her calm, steady tone played at women's empowerment meetings. Church leaders quoted her words in Sunday sermons. "This is what suppression looks like," they said, connecting it to a deeper message, one about respect, voice, and dignity. Students studied her body language. Media professors replayed her interview in class, pausing every few seconds to show how she stayed calm under pressure. They called it the Crockett technique. Stay calm, stay focused, let your opponent defeat himself. At Harvard, a professor of political communication built an entire lesson around her performance. At Georgetown, students watched the clip as part of their course on media ethics. Every time Jasmine lifted her hand to stop Jesse's interruptions, the classroom erupted in applause. Back at Fox News, Jesse struggled to pretend none of this bothered him. He joked about it on air. He smiled and shrugged when other hosts teased him. But behind closed doors, he was angry. He told a friend, "They're turning her into a hero because of one interview." His friend replied, "Maybe because you gave her the microphone." That night, Jesse went home and sat in the dark, watching the clip again. He tried to understand how it happened, how one guest turned his entire show upside down, how silence could be stronger than words. The more he watched, the worse it looked. He saw his own face, his interruptions, his smirk, and her calm. She looked confident. He looked desperate. Meanwhile, Jasmine's quiet confidence continued to grow. She spoke at a rally in Dallas, surrounded by ordinary people who saw her as a voice of reason. Reporters crowded the stage, asking how she kept her composure that night. She smiled and said, "You don't win by shouting. You win by knowing what you stand for." Her words traveled far beyond politics. Businesses began using her. Interview and communication training. Motivational. Speakers quoted her line about suppression in conferences. Everywhere she went, people thanked her for showing grace in a world addicted to noise. Inside Fox News, tension kept building. Executives wanted Jesse to fix his image. They suggested bringing Jasmine back for a round 2. He refused. "She embarrassed me once," he said. "Not again." But the internet had already made its decision. The clip was now history. People shared it not for politics, but for inspiration. It reminded them that calm can be power, that truth can be simple, that dignity still matters. Weeks passed. Ratings continued to slide. Advertisers started leaving. Fox tried changing. Jesse's set, music, even his intro. Nothing worked. Viewers couldn't unsee what they had seen. They couldn't forget the man who lost control and the woman who didn't. In Washington, Jasmine Crockett was thriving. She was invited onto national talk shows, but this time, the hosts listened. They gave her space to finish her thoughts. When asked about that night, she always smiled. "It wasn't about winning," she said. "It was about being heard." Her calm became her strength. Her grace became her weapon, and the nation kept listening. Back at Fox, Jesse sat alone in his office one night after everyone had gone home. He watched the replay one last time. When Jasmine raised her hand, he froze the frame. He stared at the image, the small gesture that silenced him. That changed everything. For the first time, he realized something he had never understood before. Control isn't the same as respect, and without respect, control means nothing. He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and whispered, "Maybe she was right." Outside, New York traffic roared below. The city moved on, but Jesse's career would never be the same. And Jasmine Crockett? She was just getting started, because what she did next didn't just make headlines, it rewrote the rules of power, and it left every talk show host in America wondering if they might be next. Jasmine Crockett returned to Washington, that week, to a hero's welcome. Cameras waited for her outside the building. Capitol reporters crowded the steps, shouting questions, but she didn't rush. She walked calmly, with that same quiet confidence she had shown in the studio. Someone called out, "Congresswoman, how does it feel to make history?" She smiled slightly and said, "I didn't make history. I just told the truth." Those 8 words appeared on screens across the country by evening. It was simple, it was humble, and it was powerful. Across the nation, people kept replaying the clip of her silencing Jesse Waters with nothing but composure. In classrooms, in office meetings, in churches and community centers, her calm voice echoed. This is what suppression looks like. That sentence had become Something bigger than a viral quote. It was now a statement of strength. Teachers used her moment to start discussions about listening. Pastors used it to talk about respect. Even parents told their children about it, teaching them that courage doesn't always have to shout. It can be steady. It can be quiet. It can be smart. At Fox News, things were not the same. Meetings grew tense. Producers spoke in whispers. Jesse tried to act normal on air, but every time he leaned forward to interrupt a guest, he could almost hear Jasmine's voice in the back of his mind. "Let me finish." He hesitated more now. He smiled less, and the audience noticed. Ratings continued to drop. Focus groups said he seemed nervous, even unsure. Advertisers shifted their money to other shows. Behind the scenes, executives argued about how to fix it. One suggested bringing Jesse off the air for a vacation. Another said, "If we take him off, we admit she beat him." So they kept him on. But the magic was gone. Meanwhile, Jasmine's career exploded. Invitations poured in from universities, advocacy groups, and talk shows. She appeared on morning news programs, not as a guest under attack, but as a respected voice of reason. She spoke clearly, never raising her voice, never boasting, and every time she spoke, people listened. At one event in Atlanta, an older woman approached her after the speech. She had tears in her eyes. "My daughter's teacher played that clip in class," she said. "They talked about how to stand up to bullies without becoming one. You gave my child strength." Jasmine hugged her gently and said, "We all have a voice. We just have to use it." The clip had turned into something bigger than television. It was now part of American conversation. Colleges created workshops about media, control, and power dynamics. Law schools used the moment as an example of courtroom grace. Public speakers studied her timing, her tone, her stillness. People started calling it the Crockett method. Stay calm, stay smart, let arrogance reveal itself. Soon, even politicians who had mocked her before began studying her approach. They watched how she used her opponent's noise against them, how she spoke to the audience instead of the host, how she turned tension into teaching. One evening, Anderson Cooper mentioned her name on CNN. He said, "Jasmine Crockett reminded us all that the quietest voice can carry the loudest truth." That clip alone reached millions. Even conservative commentators couldn't deny her impact. Some still disagreed with her politics, but they respected her discipline. "She didn't lose her temper," one wrote. "She won by refusing to play his game." Meanwhile, Jesse Waters was living through the longest few weeks of his life. Everywhere he went, someone mentioned her name. At restaurants, strangers whispered. On flights, people stared at him. Once, a woman tapped him on the shoulder and said, "You should have listened. Jesse, she was trying to help you." He laughed it off, but inside it hurt. At home, he sat in silence, watching his own reruns. He noticed how harsh his voice sounded, how impatient he looked, how smug, and he realized something he had never wanted to admit. Maybe the people he mocked had been right to be angry. Days turned into weeks. The noise slowly faded, but the lesson remained. Jesse began changing how he spoke on air. He started letting guests finish. He nodded more, interrupted less. But it didn't look natural anymore. He was a man trying to fix something that was already broken. For the first time, he looked like he was learning humility, and viewers could see it. Some even said, maybe Jasmine Crockett changed him. And in a way, she had. Back in Texas, Jasmine continued her work. She pushed new voting rights legislation, focused on access, fairness, and education. She visited small towns, shook hands with voters, and listened. Everywhere she went, people thanked her. They told her she gave them courage. At a town hall meeting in Dallas, a man stood up and said, "You taught us that silence can be strength." She smiled. "It can," she said, "but only if it's followed by truth." Her campaign fundraising broke records. More than $2 million dollars poured in from small donations in less than 2 days. Not from corporations. Not from big donors. From ordinary Americans who believed she represented something honest. Late-night shows replayed her moment again and again. Comedians joked about Jessie's stunned face, but the laughter always came with respect for Jasmine. She had done what no one thought possible. She had changed how people saw television itself. News. Anchors began talking about the Crockett effect. It meant moments when truth beats performance, when grace beats volume, when intelligence beats arrogance. By the third month, Jasmine's moment was still being studied across the world. International networks aired the clip, calling it a masterclass in composure. British papers praised her. Even in Australia, a host opened his show saying, "Every presenter should watch how that woman handled herself." In Washington, she received an invitation to speak at Georgetown University's School of Public Policy. The auditorium was full. Students, professors, journalists, all waiting. She walked to the podium, smiled, and said, "That night wasn't about winning an argument. It was about showing what power really looks like." She paused and looked around the hall. "Power isn't shouting," she said softly. "Power is when you stay calm while someone tries to shake you." The room erupted in applause. Back at Fox, Jesse watched that speech from his office. He leaned back in his chair, listening to her words. For the first time, he didn't feel angry. He felt something else, respect. He whispered, "She was right." That same evening, a producer asked him if he wanted to invite Jasmine back for another interview. He hesitated. Then he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I've already learned what I needed to learn." The following week, Jesse opened his show differently. He looked into the camera and said, "We all have strong opinions here, but maybe we can start by listening." It was the shortest opening monologue of his career, but it was also the most honest. Meanwhile, Jasmine's influence reached beyond politics, corporate. Trainers used her clip to teach. Communication law professors used it to show. Courtroom strategy counselors used it to talk about emotional control. Her calm had become a model. Months later, when she walked into a leadership conference in Chicago, the crowd gave her a standing ovation before she even spoke. She laughed softly and said, "All this because I asked one man to stop interrupting me?" The room filled with applause again. That night, during an interview with a journalist, she was asked what she felt when she raised her hand that day in the studio. She smiled and said, "Peace. I knew I had already won, not against him, but against the noise." The journalist nodded. "You made silence powerful." Jasmine laughed. "Silence was always powerful. People just forget to use it." From that moment on, her name became a symbol of strength. In boardrooms, classrooms, and even dinner tables, people would quote her when they wanted to remind someone to slow down and listen. "Remember what Jasmine Crockett said," they'd say. "This is what suppression looks like." But what they really meant was, "This is what strength looks like." Fox News eventually moved Jesse to a smaller time slot. He still had viewers, but the spark was gone. Every time he raised his voice, someone online would post that old clip of Jasmine raising her hand. It followed him everywhere. It became his shadow. He once said to a friend, "That one interview changed everything," and his friend replied, "Maybe it changed you too." He didn't answer, but deep down he knew it had. As for Jasmine, her rise didn't stop. She continued to fight for fairness and truth. She inspired new leaders, young and old, and she never stopped speaking up for those who were silenced, dismissed, or ignored. Months later, during a live panel in Washington, she said something that summed up her entire journey. "When they try to silence you," she said, "don't shout louder. Just speak clearer." The audience stood and clapped for nearly a minute. Her words had become part of the national story now. Simple, human, unforgettable. In the end, The story wasn't really about Jesse Waters' fall, it was about Jasmine Crockett's rise and what she represented to every person who's ever been talked over. For every voice ignored in a meeting, for every woman told to calm down or stay quiet, she became proof that dignity is louder than arrogance, that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard, and that sometimes the most powerful moment of all is when you raise your hand, look them in the eye, and say, "Let me finish," because that's not just a sentence. It's a message. It's a promise. And it's a reminder to never let anyone write your silence for you. If this story inspired you like it inspired millions, don't forget to tap that like button and subscribe for more true stories where courage wins over noise and truth outshines power. Stay tuned. Stay strong, and remember, calm is not weakness. It's the kind of strength that changes everything.